Alright, guys, we are back with another IX topic lecture. It's Tyler once again. And today we're going to be talking about emigration, more specifically Latin American emigration. So, just to start off, this is a picture of a migrant caravan leaving Honduras, a country in Central America, and heading through Central America to places in Mexico, to places in the United States, where people hope to settle and work. So first of all, we'll just start with an introduction, just what emigration is and what ramifications it's had. So emigration is not immigration, don't get the two confused. Emigration is leaving a nation to immigrate to another. Latin America also has one of the highest emigration rates in the world, which you can see on that map to the right, where it compares the total amount of immigrants to the total number of emigrants. Mexico is, of course, the biggest culprit, with 11 million Mexicans emigrating just in 2020. There's other maps for this as well that you could find, but these statistics can be very useful in a speech. In Honduras, 985,000 immigrants, El Salvador 1.5 million, Guatemala 1.3 million, and of course you got to remember these are tiny countries. So you've got 1 million Hondurans who have left the nation. Honduras as a nation only has a population of about, I want to say, 7 million people, 11 million people, somewhere in that range. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact figure. But obviously, when you have this many people leaving your country, it has some pretty significant ramifications. Like I said again, Mexico's the biggest culprit. Most Mexicans live and work in the United States who do choose to emigrate, of that 11 million. Kind of like I was already mentioning, most immigrants go to America, being the United States of America, Spain, because of similar linguistic and cultural backgrounds, in other more prosperous Latin American countries, which is one that doesn't get talked about a whole lot. So in a lot of these Central American nations, you don't always have people who are heading all the way to the United States. Many of them will stop off in Mexico, which is the second largest economy in Latin America. They might stop off in Mexico and they might work there and send remittances home there, because it's not as challenging as getting to the United States. Although the Mexican government is significantly ramping up its border patrol, they already have a very low tolerance for illegal immigration. So we'll see how much longer Mexico is sort of a safe haven for Central American workers lasts. And then, of course, the reason I made this topic lecture is because there's very little talk of the effects immigration actually has on the countries the immigrants are leaving from. So, it's obviously a pretty hot button issue, immigration to the United States, that is, people entering the United States. But what isn't talked about a whole lot is in countries where so many people immigrate to other countries, what's the effect back home? Because like I said, when you're a country of a few million people, and you're like El Salvador, where almost 1.6 million of your population just up and left, that has some very, very drastic effects for the country as a whole, which we're hopefully going to be able to explore throughout the remainder of this lecture. Alright, we're just going to show it anyway. So we're going to start with why are they leaving? The biggest reason for this, and just sort of the simple answer, is Latin American countries are broadly growing more unstable. There's economic instability, less opportunities as Latin American economies shrink. For example, in Argentina, their economy had a major recession and contracted by a significant margin, to the point where the Argentinian government used to be measuring its economy relative to countries like Spain and France, and now they're measuring it relative to countries like Chile and Bolivia and Peru. And then, of course, in other parts of Latin America, it's even worse. Many of these countries are very poor. They didn't used to be that poor, but because of a combination of circumstances, they are now. And this sort of instability and lack of economic opportunity forced a lot of Latin Americans to move abroad. Additionally, many already have family in other countries. So, of course, if your sons emigrate and you're, maybe their parents, you might emigrate as well. And you'll chain migrate to another country. Chain migration is, like I mentioned, it's when family members follow family members into other nations. So that might be another reason for emigration. But of course, the original immigrants are still linked back to this broad conception of instability. Additionally, money working abroad is often worth more at home. So getting paid a low wage by Mexican or American standards might be a ton of money by Guatemalan, Salvadoran, or Nicaraguan standards, which of course incentivizes even more people to leave. And then finally, refuge from violence is another huge one. On the right, we have some cartel members. Cartels, I guess mentioning cartels is a bit of a meme among extempers. Like, mentioning cartels is just a go-to reason for everything going wrong in Latin America. But there's a lot more truth to it than you might think. Cartel violence has absolutely devoured large parts of these countries, and it's basically just forcing people to leave because they're under serious because they're just under serious threat to their health and to their safety. So many of them are fleeing because these cartels are taking away economic opportunity. They're making things more challenging to get by. They're causing serious threats, and so that incentivizes more people to leave. This has been happening. I'm not too sure why. But anyway, just kind of back to that extent meme, cartels and corruption are huge. On the right, we have a corruption perceptions index for 2016 of different Latin American nations. Lower numbers are worse, and as we can see, unless you're Uruguayan, Chilean, or Costa Rican, it's basically just devastating. If you're from Mexico, right, that's a very corrupt government. Guatemala, corrupt government. Honduras, corrupt government. Nicaragua, corrupt government. Venezuela, of course, has an incredibly low rating. And this sort of form of corruption incentivizes more emigration. These are the two largest issues provoking it to begin with. So first of all, cartel violence has grown massively in the past few decades. They've basically gone from these sort of shady criminal organizations to being huge organizations that control vast swaths of territory across different nations. In Mexico and in Colombia, cartels control whole cities. They control whole regions. And the government effectively cannot operate in these regions because of the significant cartel control. They've basically got a total monopoly on the economies in these places. And of course, that takes away economic opportunity for a lot of people. It forces many to join cartels. And then the violence just forces plenty of people out because cartels are basically engaged in systematic and total warfare against the government and against rival cartels. So there's just a lot of violence. And of course, they've just been growing bolder, which is just amplifying this crisis. In fact, in some cases, whole towns in cartel-controlled areas are just completely deserted. There are areas that may have once held 100, 200 people. They've literally all emigrated somewhere else. And of course, this is just devastating. These towns are, not to sort of extrapolate too much, but they're very, very valuable economically. They produce a lot for a nation's economy. And when you have like 200, 300 people just up and leave, that's just absolutely devastating for the country that they're leaving. And then finally, corruption prevents serious government action. Many of these major government officials are on the cartel payroll. Many of them might have family members in the cartel. Some are planted by cartels themselves to make decisions that are sympathetic to cartels. And then, of course, many of these government operators are under significant threat from cartel militias and from cartel militants if they don't do what they're supposed to. For example, in towns like Juarez, for example, in Mexico, if you're a government official and you start to take any serious action against cartels, you're basically dead. So it forces lots of government officials into sort of become corrupt or die situation. And of course, they choose to maintain corruption, but then that just makes it challenging for any serious counter to cartels to occur. It stifles the economy even more, and then it just forces more people to leave. Alright, this is happening with all of them. I'm just going to hit show anyway. No matter what, just because why not, right? So then finally, we've come to the remittance economy. The remittance economy might be the most important factor of emigration. A remittance is basically money sent from one nation into another. So for example, if I'm Mexican and I'm Honduran and I'm working in the United States and sending money back to my family in Honduras, if I do that through official legal channels, that's called a remittance. There's a remittance map right over there. If you're interested in that, I recommend pausing. But basically, because of this emigration, remittances have just become absolutely massive throughout Latin America. $3.174 billion in remittances just from Mexican workers last February just goes to show how serious of a contribution to many Latin American economies this is. Essentially, without these immigrants working abroad and sending money back home, the economy would suffer just a significant downturn. In fact, in Mexico, remittances account for 3.8% of their GDP. Which again, that might not sound like a lot at first, but it's equal or exceeds the military budget of the majority of countries in NATO. So that's the majority of Western Europe. So that's sort of how much of a contribution remittances actually are to the Mexican economy. It's 3.8%. This is funding significant factors of their government. It's just funding a lot of stuff, and without it, these governments are going to face significant challenges. So kind of like I was mentioning, local Latin American economies are completely fueled by remittances in some cases. There are whole towns where almost all the spending power that they have comes from the young men in those communities who leave and work abroad and then return. So sort of without this remittance system, we'll see a lot of local economies in Latin American countries collapsing. And of course, this is just serious mismanagement on the government's part, because now what's occurring is these governments are becoming increasingly reliant on foreign nations for their own economy. They're reliant on their own workers working in other countries to fuel their economies. And of course, this isn't the fault of the workers. They're oftentimes fleeing from devastating violence, or they need the money very badly. But at the end of the day, that simply doesn't change the fact that for many of these countries that have become so dependent on remittances as part of their economy, if they try to get rid of emigration, their economy is just going to suffer massively. So it sort of creates this perpetual spiral where if they want to sort of attack emigration, cut it off, make sure that the people in their nation are contributing to their own country's economy, they're sort of killing their own economy. If they start to stabilize the nation, fight cartels, take back corruption, that's great, that's fantastic, but people are going to stop emigrating and they're suddenly going to have to figure out how to make up all that money that they get from remittances. And then I think this is the last slide. We have the president of Honduras on the right because he's a cool guy. These are just some steps that governments could hypothetically take to address the immigration issue. So unfortunately, it's not sort of it's not an easy fix. It's not just a band-aid. It's dealing with numerous systemic issues that have plagued many of these Latin American countries for a significant period of time. So one way to do it might be to solicit foreign investment. This has been talked about in numerous Latin American states and Central America especially, where you have these governments trying to solicit American, European, Chinese, Russian investment in return for conceding certain factors to these nations, and then they use this money to try and kickstart their own economies, which convinces people to emigrate less. Of course, increasing anti-cartel operations, possibly in conjunction with other nations, is another great way to quell immigration when you can stabilize the land. People are less incentivized to leave. Incentivizing temporary immigration is also good. Basically, you have these people coming back eventually, rather than just staying in the countries that they're working at. And then, of course, this is a bit of a more out there suggestion, but some radical elements of the Mexican government have even tried to integrate Mexican immigrants in the United States. They allow them to retain Mexican citizenship, to run for office for Mexican posts while living in the United States. And in some cases, there's even been talks of strategically, demographically resettling different portions of sort of the United States on the border with Mexico to make them more sympathetic to Mexico as a whole. So what we see are some more radical, again, I want to emphasize very radical, fringe elements of the Mexican government basically trying to weaponize this immigration and use it as a means of foreign policy control. So yeah, that's it. I hope the mic quality wasn't too bad, and hopefully I'll be able to give another lecture for you guys next week. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening.